Timothy Ferris here with a few words about what I'll call the Interstellar Internet. Something we could build perhaps, and something others may have built in the past. When I came up with this speculation back in the early 70s and published an essay about it in Harper's Magazine in 1975, it was more difficult to explain what I meant because back then there was no internet. The standard for communications was the telephone call. Telephone calls were expensive. In the classic telephone technology, your voice had to go through a copper wire to other copper wires, and that had to continue all the way to your listener. If you were talking to someone overseas from here in the US, passed through undersea cables and such, made it expensive. A trope of the time was that there'd be noise in a room and the person on the phone would say, "Quiet, quiet, I'm on long distance." And that was expensive. Nowadays, the telephone call is instantly converted into data, zeros and ones. And those binary data can be transferred across the world any number of ways, not just through cables, but via satellite and reassembled at the other end. It sounds much clearer, and you may also have noticed that the delays you used to encounter when you're talking to someone halfway across the world have been largely eliminated by efficacies in the programming. And of course, the internet itself means that massive amounts of information are available to you from any node anywhere in the world very quickly. The internet keeps a memory of a great deal of the traffic that moves through the many nodes of the internet. And that, in fact, is the rationale for these Rocky Hill lectures, which are intended not to make a splash about current events in the day, but to provide tools for people interested in these sorts of things going on down through the years to come. And when astronomers like Frank Drake, the scientist who conducted the first radio search for extraterrestrial intelligence, guy who came up with the idea for the Voyager Golden Record, and who died just a few months ago, making this recording at the end of the year 2022, when Frank Drake would talk about the possibility of communicating with other intelligent civilizations in the galaxy, intelligence meaning those who have a sufficient capacity of abstract language to be able to use what we call words and mathematical equations. The common skeptical response was to treat it as if it would be a phone call. You'd get a message from someone 100 light years away saying hello, and then you'd say hello, and that would take another 100 years. And then the alien would say, "How are you?" and another century would go by before you got that message. And that clearly wouldn't work. That's why Frank and other astronomers interested in the subject of communicating with extraterrestrials assumed that messages would be encyclopedic in length. They would contain a lot of information because, after all, the alien sending the message knew about the long periods of time that are required for signals even traveling at the velocity of light to go from one planetary system orbiting one star to another. But there's a way around all that, and it's networks. Let me first describe how we might construct one, and then consider the prospect that we might well not be the first creatures in our galaxy to have done so. To build an interstellar network, one sends probes, let's say 10 probes, very small, miniaturized smart probes, to other planetary systems that appear to be of interest. Surely one or more would go to the Alpha Centauri system, for instance, only a little over 4 light years from Earth. These probes could have a mass comparable to just a golf ball or a grapefruit. Perhaps they could be accelerated to some decent velocity using giant lasers. There's a good case for creating such a laser station on the far side of the moon. So you propel them out there. They'd have to have a way when they reach the new star system to decelerate. That's a big weight concern. But assuming you can solve all that, these smart probes would examine the planetary system on arrival and find a place to set up shop. This could be on a comet or perhaps an ice-rich asteroid. And their task would be to mine the local materials and to build, we today might say 3D print or that sort of thing, other probes just like themselves, to fuel them up perhaps with water ice is good. You can break it down into hydrogen and oxygen, makes traditional rocket fuel, or perhaps construct laser launchers that could send these probes on to other planets while reconnoitering the system in which they have found themselves. Each probe would, of course, stay in contact with us back on Earth, and also with the other probes in their systems, as well as the new ones that it's able to dispatch on to star systems beyond. The length of time necessary to deploy such an interstellar internet depends basically on how fast you can launch the probes. If it's 1% the velocity of light, then it would take centuries to reach even the nearest star. If you can get up to 10% the velocity of light for these very low mass probes, you might be able to get to stars in the order of a few generations. But that's okay because their long-term purpose and function is quite significant. Not only do they gather information about where they are, but they are inheritors of the information coming from all the other probes. And of course, if each of them is sending out, let's say, 10 more probes, then over a cosmically short period of time, you start to have eyes and ears in hundreds and then thousands of planetary systems all across our part of the galaxy. A little bit of this technology is already starting to appear. Laser propulsion experiments have been done with small solar sailors to move across interplanetary distances here in our own system. And we're increasingly seeing intelligent machines that can replicate themselves and replicate other things. If we're to colonize Mars, it'll be necessary to establish accommodations and rocket fuel factories, most likely, on Mars before the first humans get there. So it's an extension of technology, but not one that's all that difficult to envision. And of course, for a small initial investment, one gets a salient of knowledge, close examinations of star systems, surveillance of other worlds that stretches across the galaxy and continues to expand at whatever your expansion rate might be. Let's say it's on the order of 1% or 10% of the velocity of light. There are a lot of reasons that we might do this. The knowledge alone is worth the modest initial cost. There are also security concerns. We'd like to know what's going on out there in regions of which we are almost entirely ignorant at present. And while the technology may seem exotic at present, it's not that different, to use one example that occurs to me often, from the technology of those Ice Age humans, the bodies of some of whom have begun to be found in mountain regions as global warming melts glaciers and reveals their presence. These human explorers, which include the folks who came across the Bering Strait and settled the Americas something over 13,000 years ago, did not carry a lot of stuff. They had a few tools, weapons, clothing, of course, but what they mostly had was intelligence, the intelligence to apply these tools and make a life for them in a new environment. Now, this was still Earth, so the environment was friendlier to humans than we'd expect to find on other worlds. But our first probes to other planetary systems, little automated probes like I'm envisioning here, would have the same kind of approach, a tough little toolkit combined with intelligence to enable them to transform asteroids and comets into growing ranks of memory banks and sensors so that human intelligence, human senses, could be extended out to hundreds, thousands, and then perhaps millions of stars with planets. Now, the main reason I bring all this up is that if it makes sense for us to do it, it would have made sense to earlier inhabitants of our galaxy to do it as well. For a lonely civilization like ours in a period when it doesn't know if there are any other advanced civilizations in the galaxy, it's useful for just the reasons I've been mentioning. It's an inexpensive way to reconnoiter a growing area of our part of the galaxy and to learn more about it. And previous intelligent species may have taken a similar approach. It's also possible that multiple advanced civilizations have existed in our galaxy in the past, or may today, and have been in communication with one another. For them, an interstellar internet makes sense too. It means you're not sending messages and waiting long times for an answer. You're looking, as we do on our internet here at home, to see what the cultures of your society and all the other societies that might be online, scattered across the galaxy, have to say and tell you about our wider world. If you have a lot of civilizations in communication, it means that you don't need lots of transmitters and receivers aimed at different planets. If everyone's on the interstellar internet, all you need is a node that can access that system. Tapping into these resources could be rather like what happened in European civilization with its discovery of the works of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Those writers are not alive today. They weren't alive when their works reached Europe at the dawn of the Renaissance. And yet they have tremendous ongoing influence on us, as the contents of an interstellar internet might have for its participants as well. Today, scientists are continuing to search for signs of intelligent life elsewhere, inheritors of that original passion of Frank Drake's. These projects are all privately funded. They use multiple radio telescopes to examine the huge phase space of not only direction in space, but also things like the frequency at which signals might be transmitted, their bandwidth, and so forth. And no one yet knows how to estimate their chances of success. But I would anticipate, if there's anything to this idea of networking on an interstellar scale, that the first signal we receive will not be coming from a planet, but from a node on an interstellar internet. There are a lot of advantages to such a thing. An interstellar internet can maintain a little sort of beacon to help acquire emergent civilizations like ours. It doesn't have to fear what they might do if they found out about it, because it's just a network and it can conceal as much about the location of its members as they would like. That's really how an interstellar internet would work, that you can all participate on it without anyone having to give away the location of their own particular species. There's a theory popular in some circles of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence that we don't have to worry about other civilizations because somehow they'll be highly developed, and when they're highly developed, they'll all be peaceful. That seems to me to be quite an assumption. I'm not sure it would be shared by, say, hundreds of civilizations participating in an interstellar internet, gaining knowledge from it. So it'd be advantageous for them to be able to share only such information as they deemed it safe to do. And the same would be offered to us as we joined such an internet. We wouldn't have to give away information about ourselves, but we could communicate quite a lot, as we tried to do with the Voyager record, about our culture and our view of things and whatever might be interesting to a broader audience. And we could harvest that internet node for tremendous amounts of the thinking and history and science and even the art of however many intelligent species may be out there today. Hey, thanks for listening. See you next time.